For an entire decade, I sacrificed my youth and sanity to pay my parents' mortgage. I thought I was keeping a roof over our family. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I walked into their study and heard them signing away that very same house to my brother, leaving me with absolutely nothing. What they did not realize was that I had stopped paying their bank 5 years ago and did something much more permanent. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat who fought back. My name is Vivian, and I am 33 years old. I am the founder and CEO of a successful financial technology firm. To my parents, Barbara and Richard, I have only ever been a convenient bank account. Growing up, my older brother Mason was the undisputed golden child. He could do no wrong. I was the backup plan they only acknowledged when they needed something funded. I had driven over to their house that afternoon to drop off some paperwork. I let myself in through the front door, expecting to find my mother watching television. Instead, the house was eerily quiet. I set my keys down and walked down the long hardwood hallway toward my father's study. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar, and voices drifted out into the corridor. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was the sharp, commanding voice of my sister-in-law, Maya. Maya is a stunning, ambitious African-American woman who married my brother 3 years ago. She is calculating and obsessed with social status. I stood frozen outside the door as her words pierced the quiet house. "You need to sign this newly drafted will today, Richard," Maya demanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Mason is your firstborn son. He carries your family name. It only makes sense that the entire estate is left to him." I leaned closer, holding my breath. I heard my mother Barbara chime in with her usual syrupy voice. "Maya is right, Richard. Vivian is 33, she is unmarried, she has no children. She is obsessed with her tech company. What on earth does she need a 4-bedroom house for? Mason and Maya need the space to build their life together." My father grunted in agreement. "I suppose you make a valid point," he said dismissively. "Vivian has always been too independent for her own good anyway. She will figure her own life out. Mason needs this foundation to succeed. Just show me where to sign." The sound that followed was unmistakable. The crisp scratching of a fountain pen against thick paper. In seconds, my parents had eagerly signed away the very house I had been funding for 10 grueling years. They were securing their golden child's future while erasing mine. I had spent sleepless nights worrying about their financial ruin, transferring my hard-earned money into their accounts while they praised Mason for simply existing. I pushed the heavy oak door wide open. The hinges creaked loudly, and all 3 heads snapped in my direction. The smug satisfaction on Maya's face instantly evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed panic. My father dropped his pen and my mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. I did not yell. I simply leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my designer blazer. "Well," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "I hope Mason enjoys his inheritance. It is fascinating how quickly you can give away a house that you could not afford to keep without my money." My mother recovered first, pasting on a defensive scowl. "Vivian, what are you doing sneaking around and eavesdropping on private family matters?" "Private family matters, regarding the mortgage I pay every single month," I countered, stepping into the room. Maya stood up, smoothing her expensive skirt. "Do not be dramatic, Vivian. You make plenty of money with your startup. Mason is building a family. It is only fair that the estate goes to the true heirs. You should be happy to help your brother." I looked Maya dead in the eye, then shifted my gaze to my parents. "Happy to help," I repeated softly. "I spent my 20s working 80 hours a week to make sure the bank did not throw you onto the street. Your gratitude is cutting me out of the will to reward a man who has never held a steady job." My father slammed his fist on the desk. "You will not disrespect your brother in this house. You are a woman, Vivian. This house must remain with Mason to carry on our legacy. End of discussion." I smiled a slow, chilling smile. I looked at the freshly signed will, then back at the people who were supposed to love me. Understood. I said softly. I turned on my heel and walked out. I got into my car, and as I pulled out of their driveway, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. For a decade, I had played the role of their financial savior. They believed my loyalty was unconditional. They believed I would accept being discarded the moment my usefulness ran out. They fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I pulled over and picked up my phone. I opened my banking app. With 3 quick taps, I canceled the automated monthly mortgage payments that had been flowing into their bank account for 10 long years. Then I permanently blocked their numbers. A month later, my phone buzzed on my desk. It was an angry text from my mother from a new phone number. The mortgage is due today. No greeting. No asking how I was doing. Just a typical demand for cash. I stared at the screen, letting a cold smile form on my lips. I typed my reply, hitting send without a second thought. Then you should ask your landlord. I turned off my phone and smiled to myself. My name is Vivian, and I am 33 years old. I am the founder and chief executive officer of a successful financial technology firm. For a decade, I sacrificed my youth to pay my parents' mortgage. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, I walked into their study and heard them signing away that very house to my brother, leaving me with nothing. What they did not realize was that I stopped paying their bank 5 years ago and did something much more permanent. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat who fought back. To my parents, Barbara and Richard, I have only ever been a convenient bank account. Growing up, my older brother Mason was the golden child. I was the backup plan they only acknowledged when they needed something funded. I had driven over to their house that afternoon to drop off some paperwork. I let myself in expecting to find my mother watching television. Instead, the house was eerily quiet. I walked down the long hardwood hallway toward my father's study. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar, and voices drifted into the corridor. It was the sharp, commanding voice of my sister-in-law, Maya. Maya is a stunning, ambitious African-American woman who married my brother 3 years ago. She is calculating and obsessed with social status. I stood frozen outside the door as her words pierced the quiet house. "You need to sign this newly drafted will today," Richard Maya demanded. "Mason is your firstborn son. He carries your family name. It only makes sense that the entire estate is left to him." I heard my mother Barbara chime in with her usual syrupy voice. "Maya is exactly right, Richard. Vivian is 33. She is unmarried and has no children. She is obsessed with her tech company. What does she need a 4-bedroom house for? Mason and Maya need the space to build their life together." My father grunted in agreement. "I suppose you make a valid point," he said. "Vivian has always been too independent anyway. She will figure her own life out. Mason needs this foundation to succeed. Just show me where to sign." The scratching of a pen against thick paper. In seconds, my parents had eagerly signed away the very house I had been funding for 10 grueling years. They were securing their golden child's future while completely erasing mine. I pushed the heavy oak door wide open. The hinges creaked loudly, and all 3 heads snapped in my direction. The smug satisfaction on Maya's face instantly evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed panic. My father dropped his pen and my mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. I did not yell. I simply leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Well," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "I hope Mason enjoys his inheritance. It is fascinating how quickly you can give away a house that you could not afford to keep without my money." My mother recovered first, pasting on a defensive scowl. "Vivian, what are you doing sneaking around and eavesdropping on private family matters?" "Private family matters regarding the mortgage I pay every single month," I countered, stepping into the room. Maya stood up, smoothing her expensive skirt. "Do not be dramatic, Vivian. You make plenty of money with your startup. Mason is building a family. It is only fair that the estate goes to the true heirs." I looked Maya dead in the eye, then shifted my gaze to my parents. "Happy to help," I repeated softly. I spent my 20s working 80 hours a week to make sure the bank did not throw you onto the street. Your gratitude is cutting me out of the will to reward a man who has never held a steady job. My father slammed his fist on the desk. You will not disrespect your brother in this house. You are a woman, Vivian. This house must remain with Mason to carry on our legacy. I smiled a slow, chilling smile. Understood, I said softly. I turned on my heel and walked out. For a decade, I had played the role of their financial savior. They believed my loyalty was unconditional. They fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I pulled over and picked up my phone. I opened my banking app. With 3 quick taps, I canceled the automated monthly mortgage transfers that had been flowing into their bank account for 10 long years. Then I permanently blocked their numbers. A month later, my phone buzzed on my desk. It was an angry text from my mother from a new phone number. The mortgage is due today. No greeting, no asking how I was doing, just a demand for cash. I stared at the screen, letting a cold smile form on my lips. I typed my reply, hitting send without a second thought. Then you should ask your landlord. I turned off my phone and smiled to myself, leaning back in my office chair. Barbara and Richard never sat quietly when wronged. I could picture them right now marching into their local bank branch with Mason in tow, ready to complain that their ungrateful daughter had missed a payment. They would demand to speak to the branch manager about their late notices. And that was when the manager would look at their file and drop the massive bombshell. He would look them dead in the eye and explain that they did not have a mortgage with that bank anymore. He would tell them that their debt was sold off to a private corporate entity 5 years ago. The harsh reality of my text message would finally register in my mother's mind. They were about to learn that you cannot bequeath a property you do not legally own. The war had officially begun, and I held every single weapon. The fallout from their bank visit did not take long to reach me. It was Thursday morning, and I was standing in the sleek glass-enclosed lobby of my financial technology firm, reviewing quarterly projections on my tablet. My company occupied the top 3 floors of a prime downtown high-rise. I had built this empire from nothing, pouring my sweat and tears into every line of code and every investor pitch. The elevator doors chimed and slid open with a soft metallic ring. Maya and Mason stormed out, stepping onto the polished marble floors of my reception area. Mason looked pale and sweaty, his designer shirt wrinkled. Maya, however, was practically vibrating with rage. Her heels clicked sharply against the stone as she marched directly toward the reception desk. I watched them from the mezzanine level, feeling a detached sense of amusement. They had bypassed security by tailgating an employee group, but they clearly had no idea how out of their depth they were in my domain. I handed my tablet to my assistant and walked down the glass staircase. Vivian Maya shrieked, her voice echoing off the acoustic ceiling panels. Several of my employees stopped typing, turning their heads to witness the spectacle. Maya pointed a manicured finger at me, her face contorted in anger. How dare you ignore our calls? How dare you play these sick games with your parents? I reached the bottom of the stairs and stood firmly, placing my hands in my pockets. I am not playing any games, Maya. I am simply running my business. A business you are currently disrupting. Mason stepped forward, puffing out his chest, trying to look intimidating. You listen to me, Vivian, he demanded. We went to the bank. We saw the statements. You sold our parents' debt to some faceless corporation without telling them. You set them up to lose their house. I laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that made Mason flinch. Our parents' debt, Mason. Not your parents' house. They defaulted 5 years ago because they took out a second mortgage to pay off your gambling debts. The bank was 30 days away from foreclosing and throwing them onto the street. I bought the debt through my private holding company to save them. They have been my tenants for 5 years, and they did not even notice because I kept their payment schedule identical. Maya slammed her hand on the reception desk, startling my receptionist. You are a cold-blooded monster, she screamed. You stole their property. They are your flesh and blood, and you are treating them like a real estate investment. You are abusing the elderly. I am going to ruin you. I will go on every social media platform and expose what a terrible, greedy daughter you are. I will tell the world that the brilliant tech founder is actually throwing her sick parents onto the freezing streets. I let her scream. I let her voice carry through the open floor plan. I wanted every employee, every visiting investor, and every security camera to capture her unhinged behavior. You are making a terrible mistake, Maya, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, authoritative register. You are standing in a corporate office making terroristic threats and false accusations of elder abuse. You are doing this on high-definition security cameras equipped with audio recording. Maya scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Do you think I care about cameras? You are a fraud, Vivian. You claim to be this self-made billionaire, but you built your wealth by swindling your own family. Mason nodded vigorously, feeding off his wife's aggressive energy. We are taking you to court, Vivian. We are going to sue you for everything you have. You stole my inheritance. Your inheritance, I asked, raising an eyebrow. How can I steal something you never earned? You are 35 years old, Mason. You have never held a job for more than 6 months. Your startup is a joke that bleeds money. The only reason you have a roof over your head is because Mom and Dad funnel my money into your bank accounts. Maya stepped closer, her eyes wide with fury. Do not you dare insult my husband. He is a visionary. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand to see her brother happy. I will destroy this company, Vivian. I will post everything. Your investors will drop you in a heartbeat when they find out you prey on senior citizens. I gestured toward the ceiling corner where a black dome camera blinked with a steady red light. Please be my guest, Maya. Post whatever you like. But remember that libel is a civil offense and extortion is a criminal one. You came to my place of business demanding money and assets that do not belong to you while threatening to damage my professional reputation. My lawyers will have a field day with this. Mason grabbed Maya's arm, looking suddenly nervous. The realization that they were on camera making actionable threats was finally penetrating his thick skull. Maya, let us go, he muttered, pulling her back. This is not the place. Maya yanked her arm away, glaring at me with pure hatred. This is not over, Vivian. You think you can just cut us off and steal our future? We will see you in court. You will pay for this. I watched them retreat toward the elevators. As the doors opened, Maya turned back and spat one final insult. You will die alone with your money, Vivian. I smiled, waving politely as the doors slid shut, cutting off her voice. I turned to my receptionist, who was staring in stunned silence. Please cancel my 10 o'clock meeting, I told her calmly. I need to make a phone call to our corporate litigation department. I walked up the staircase, feeling a powerful surge of adrenaline. They wanted a war. They had just walked right into my carefully laid trap. I stopped on the stairs as the elevator doors unexpectedly slid open. Mason had thrown his hand out, catching the sensor. He stomped back into the lobby, his face red with rage. You think you can just dismiss us? He yelled, his voice cracking slightly. You owe us an explanation, Vivian. You owe our parents respect. Maya trailed behind him, her arms crossed, nodding in agreement. I paused on the glass staircase, looking down at the two of them. The adrenaline in my veins cooled into a sharp, icy focus. I walked down the steps, my heels echoing in the silent lobby. My employees were still watching, captivated by the unfolding drama. I decided it was time to give them and the security cameras the full story. I walked right up to Mason, stopping inches from his face. I do not owe you anything, Mason. I said, my voice low but carrying perfectly across the open room. In fact, it is the other way around. Let us talk about respect and let us talk about money. I turned to Maya, who was glaring at me with undisguised contempt. Maya, I asked, maintaining steady eye contact, how exactly did your husband afford that lavish destination wedding in the Bahamas 3 years ago, with the oceanfront villas and imported orchids? Maya lifted her chin, her expression haughty. Mason is a successful entrepreneur. His early investments paid off. He wanted to give me the wedding of my dreams because he values me unlike you, who values nothing but a bank account. I laughed a sharp sound of amusement. A successful entrepreneur, I repeated. Mason, tell your wife about your investments. Tell her exactly whose money you used to pay for those oceanfront villas and that brand new Mercedes you drove away in. Mason swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the exit. Keep your mouth shut, Vivian, he warned, stepping between us. I stepped around him, maintaining eye contact with my sister-in-law. He did not use investment money, Maya, I said deliberately. 8 years ago, I was 25, building my first software prototype. I ended up in the emergency room with a ruptured appendix. I was hospitalized for 2 weeks. During that time, I gave our parents limited access to my emergency savings account to cover my medical bills. I trusted them completely. Maya frowned, her confidence wavering for a fraction of a second. What does that have to do with my wedding? It has everything to do with your wedding, I replied, stepping closer. Because while I was lying in a hospital bed attached to an intravenous drip, our parents allowed Mason to access that account. He drained my emergency fund, $120,000 gone. My medical bills went to collections, ruining my credit for years. And what did Mason do? He used it to pretend he was wealthy and buy that diamond on your finger. Maya stared at me, her mouth slightly open. She looked at Mason, her eyes demanding a denial. Mason, tell me she is lying, Maya said, her voice tight. Tell me you did not steal from your sick sister to pay for our wedding. Mason wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. It was not stealing, he stammered pleadingly. Mom and Dad said Vivian had money. They said it was an early inheritance advance from the family. They told me to take it to get my business off the ground. You used my medical fund to buy a Mercedes and a party in the Bahamas, I stated. You are a thief, Mason. A pathetic, weak man who has survived entirely by leeching off my hard work. The entire lobby was dead silent. Everyone heard the truth. Maya stood frozen. I thought I saw horror in her eyes. I thought she might actually have a moral compass. I thought realizing her husband was a fraud and a thief might finally break her loyalty to him. I was wrong. The shock on Maya's face lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then a hard mask of pure greed slid back into place. She grabbed Mason's arm, pulling him closer to her. So what? Maya snapped, tossing her head defiantly. You were young, Vivian. You had no responsibilities. Mason was trying to launch a career. Families are supposed to support each other. You should be honored that your money went towards something beautiful instead of just sitting in a bank account. I stared at her, amazed by her delusion. You are justifying theft, I asked. You are justifying leaving a 25-year-old girl with crippling medical debt so you could drink champagne on a beach. Yes, Maya hissed, stepping right into my personal space. Because you are selfish, Vivian. You always have been. You hoard your wealth while your parents struggle. I do not care where the money came from. I am Mason's wife. We deserve this lifestyle. And you owe your parents for raising you. You will pay their bills, Vivian. You will pay their mortgage, or I swear to God I will drag your name through the mud until your company goes bankrupt. The audacity was breathtaking. Her greed overrode any human decency. She did not care he was a fraud. She only cared that the money faucet had been turned off. I looked at the two of them, a pair of desperate parasites. You are truly made for each other, I said, my tone laced with absolute disgust. But this is the end of the line. I signaled my heavily built security guards. Gentlemen, I said firmly, these two individuals are trespassing. They threatened me and caused a major public disturbance. Escort them off the premises. If they resist, have them arrested. The guards stepped between us, corralling Maya and Mason toward the revolving doors. I stood watching them being physically removed. Mason kept his head down, but Maya shouted obscenities until the glass doors shut. Call my lawyers, I instructed coldly, to my assistant who was already dialing her phone. Tell them we need a restraining order filed against my brother and his wife immediately. I walked back up the glass stairs to my office, closing the heavy oak door behind me. I sat at my desk, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I knew my family would not simply walk away quietly. Maya and Mason had been humiliated in front of my entire staff, and people like them always retaliated. But I was not prepared for the sheer maliciousness of their next move. My parents, Barbara and Richard, had always been obsessed with appearances, but they were also incredibly vindictive when crossed. If they could not force me to pay their bills directly, they were going to try and destroy the very source of my income. The smear campaign began less than 48 hours after the incident in the lobby. It was a Tuesday morning when my chief financial officer knocked frantically on my office door. He looked pale and was holding his tablet with a white-knuckle grip. "Vivian, we have a massive problem," he said, stepping into the room and closing the blinds. "I just got off a conference call with our 3 lead investors from the Silicon Valley Venture Capital Group. They are threatening to pull their Series C funding." I stood up my chair, scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Why would they pull out?" I demanded. "Our quarterly projections are up 20%, and our user acquisition is breaking records. We are 6 months away from our initial public offering." He swallowed hard, avoiding my eyes. "They received a series of phone calls yesterday afternoon. Someone claiming to be your mother reached out to all the major stakeholders. She told them you are having a severe mental breakdown. She claimed you are showing signs of extreme paranoia and financial instability." My blood ran completely cold. How did my mother even get their contact information? "They found the press release from our last funding round," he explained, handing me the tablet. "It listed the venture capital firms and the lead partners. Your parents tracked down their office numbers and demanded emergency meetings. They told the investors that you have been secretly abusing them, stealing their retirement funds, and locking them out of their own bank accounts. They claimed your mental health is rapidly deteriorating and that investing in your tech company is a massive liability." I sank back into my chair, staring at the wall. My parents were actually trying to burn my company to the ground. They knew how fragile investor confidence could be right before a major public offering. They wanted to create a panic to force me into a corner. If my investors pulled out, the initial public offering would fail and my company could collapse. "I need to speak with the board immediately," I ordered, grabbing my phone. "Set up an emergency video conference. I am not letting my parents destroy 5 years of my hard work with a few fabricated phone calls." Within the hour, I was sitting in front of my screen, facing 5 of my most crucial investors. They looked stern and deeply concerned. Before any of them could speak, I took control of the narrative. "Gentlemen, I understand you received some disturbing phone calls yesterday." I began, projecting absolute confidence. "I want to be entirely transparent with you. The people who called you are my estranged parents. They are currently facing severe financial ruin due to their own mismanagement and my brother's failed business ventures. For the past decade, I have financially supported them. When I finally cut them off this week, they decided to retaliate." The lead investor leaned forward into his camera. "Vivian, this is a highly sensitive situation. Your mother sent us an email claiming she has documentation of elder abuse. We cannot have our firm associated with that kind of scandal, especially right before we take this company public. We need assurances that this will not explode in the media." I did not blink. I shared my screen, pulling up the security footage from my lobby showing Maya and Mason acting unhinged and threatening me. Then I pulled up the financial records, proving my parents were the ones exploiting my accounts, not the other way around. "I am currently securing restraining orders against them," I stated firmly. "They have absolutely zero documentation of elder abuse because it is a complete fabrication. They are attempting to extort me, and I am handling it through the proper legal channels. Your investments are completely safe. The business is thriving, and I will not allow their desperation to affect our timeline." The investors watched the footage and reviewed the financial summaries. The tension in the virtual room slowly dissipated. They were businessmen who valued logic and hard evidence over emotional phone calls. After a grueling hour of answering their questions, I successfully managed to secure their continued support. The funding would stay in place. I ended the call feeling physically exhausted but victorious. I had put out the fire before it could consume my life, but the relief was extremely short-lived. When I left the office that evening and arrived at my downtown penthouse, the concierge stopped me at the front desk. "A gentleman was here looking for you, Miss Vivian," he said, handing me a thick manila envelope. He said he was a process server, and this delivery was highly urgent. It is a formal legal summons. I took the heavy envelope, my hands feeling unnaturally numb. I rode the private elevator up to my apartment, tearing open the seal the moment the doors closed. I pulled out a massive stack of legal documents printed on heavy formal paper. I stared at the bold black text at the very top of the first page. My parents and Mason were officially suing me for elder fraud, demanding $1 million in damages now that I caused by halting my support. Holding the legal summons in my living room, I laughed. The sheer audacity of their claim was breathtaking. They tried framing my decade of voluntary financial salvation as a contractual obligation. They weaponized the legal system to force me back into my role as their bank account. I did not panic. I called the most ruthless litigator in my company's legal arsenal. Julian specialized in destroying frivolous lawsuits before they ever reached a courtroom. I sent him every single document. Julian reviewed the files quickly and called me with a plan. The court required us to attempt a mandatory mediation session before moving to trial. Julian said this was our opportunity to crush their entire operation. We were not going to settle. We would let them expose their hand and then drop the hammer. 2 weeks later, I stepped out of my car and walked into a gleaming high-rise. The mediation took place on the 40th floor in a conference room overlooking the city. I wore a tailored charcoal suit. I was not walking into a family meeting. I was walking into a corporate negotiation prepared to execute a hostile takeover. Julian met me in the lobby carrying a heavy briefcase containing every financial record we had compiled. He gave me a nod as we stepped into the elevator. We rode up in absolute silence. When the doors swung open, the scene was exactly as predicted. Barbara and Richard were seated on the far side of the table. They dressed for the part of distressed elderly victims. My mother wore a drab sweater without makeup to look pale and exhausted. She clutched a crumpled tissue in her hands, dabbing at dry eyes. My father sat beside her with slumped shoulders, playing a broken man. It was pure manipulation. Seated next to them were Mason and his wife Maya. Maya wore a designer dress that cost more than a monthly mortgage payment. She sat up perfectly straight, her manicured hands folded neatly on the table. Maya shot me a look of pure smug satisfaction. Mason sat beside her, trying to look intimidating and victorious. They believed this lawsuit was their golden ticket to early retirement. Sitting at the head of their side of the table was their attorney. He was a sleazy-looking man with a cheap suit and a loud voice. I would later learn his name was Gregory. He looked like the kind of lawyer who took cases on contingency, hoping for a quick settlement payout. He puffed out his chest as Julian and I took our seats directly across from them. The court-appointed mediator, a stern woman with glasses, sat at the head of the table. She officially opened the session, reminding everyone that the goal was to find a mutually agreeable resolution without wasting court resources. As soon as she finished speaking, Gregory launched into his aggressive opening statement. He slammed his hand on the table to emphasize his ridiculous points. My clients have suffered unimaginable emotional and financial distress at the hands of their own daughter, he proclaimed loudly. Vivian has engaged in a systematic campaign of elder abuse. She abruptly cut off the financial support she had verbally promised them for their retirement. She caused them severe emotional trauma by threatening their housing stability. Furthermore, she has unlawfully acquired the debt on their family home and is now using it to hold them hostage. Gregory paced behind his chair, pointing a finger at me. He painted a picture of me as a heartless corporate monster who preyed on vulnerable senior citizens. My mother chimed in right on cue, letting out a loud theatrical sob. She buried her face in her hands, leaning against my father. We gave her everything, Barbara wailed loudly. We raised her and loved her, and she threw us away like garbage. She is trying to leave us homeless. Mason patted his mother on the back, shooting me a dirty look. Maya just smirked, clearly enjoying the show. Gregory raised his voice over my mother's fake crying. To resolve this matter without dragging your reputation through a public trial, we have prepared a list of settlement demands. First, Vivian must immediately resume paying the monthly mortgage on the family property. Second, she must legally transfer the deed of the house entirely into Mason's name to ensure the parents have a secure future caretaker. Third, we are demanding a $1 million settlement for the severe emotional distress and reputational damage caused by her actions. If these demands are met, we will withdraw the lawsuit and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The mediator looked at Julian and me, expecting a response. Gregory stood tall, waiting for me to break down or panic. Mason and Maya exchanged excited glances, clearly already spending the $1 million in their heads. They laid out their absurd extortion attempt with complete confidence. They wanted my money. They wanted my property. They wanted to punish me for daring to stop being their personal ATM. I did not react. I did not blink. I did not show a single ounce of emotion. I just sat in total silence, letting their ridiculous demands hang in the air. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. The smug grins on Mason and Maya's faces slowly began to falter as my silence stretched on for 10 unbearable seconds. I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my arms. I looked at Gregory, then at my parents, and finally at my brother. I let them bathe in the awkward, heavy silence. I was not going to argue with them. I was not going to defend myself against their fabricated lies. I was simply waiting for Julian to open his briefcase. I turned my head slightly and gave my lawyer a single brief nod. The trap was fully set, and it was time to slam it shut. I smiled at my family, knowing they had completely ruined their lives. Julian unclasped the brass latches of his heavy leather briefcase. The sharp click echoed through the silent conference room like a gunshot. He did not pull out a counteroffer or a polite legal rebuttal. He pulled out 4 massive black binders, each bursting with highlighted financial documents and bank records. He slid one binder directly across the polished mahogany table until it hit Gregory's hands. Julian buttoned his suit jacket and stood up, projecting the aura of an apex predator closing in on its prey. "We reject every single one of your demands," Julian stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "In fact, we are not here to negotiate a settlement at all today. We are here to offer you a singular opportunity to withdraw this frivolous lawsuit before my client hands these binders over to the federal authorities." Gregory scoffed, attempting to maintain his aggressive facade. "You cannot intimidate us with paperwork," he sneered loudly. "My clients have a legitimate claim of elder abuse, and we will see you in court." Julian smiled thinly, resting his fingertips on the cold glass table. "Are you entirely sure you want to proceed to discovery, Gregory? Because my legal team spent the last 14 days conducting a comprehensive forensic audit of your client's finances. We traced every single dollar that flowed through this entire family over the past decade." Julian opened his own copy of the binder and flipped to a page marked with a bright red tab. "Let us begin with Mason," he said, turning his gaze to my older brother. "Mason runs a tech startup. Maya boasts about it endlessly on her social media accounts. She tells everyone her husband is a visionary entrepreneur, destined for greatness." Julian pulled out a thick stack of bank statements and spread them widely across the table. "These records show the complete financial history of your corporate entity, Mason. You have 0 active clients on your roster. You have 0 software products in active development. Your only source of revenue is taking money from new naive investors and using it to pay off the initial investors to create the illusion of profitability." Mason turned completely white, losing all his previous arrogance. His jaw dropped open, and he stared at the documents as if they were venomous snakes ready to strike. He tried to speak to defend his honor, but no words came out. Maya shifted aggressively in her seat, her manicured hands gripping the armrests tightly. "What is he talking about, Mason?" she demanded, her voice rising in genuine panic. "Tell him he is lying to us right now. Tell him your investors are seeing massive returns on their capital." Julian did not let Mason answer his wife. "He is running a textbook Ponzi scheme," Maya Julian interjected sharply, cutting her off. "He has been defrauding investors for 3 years to fund your luxury lifestyle and your lavish destination weddings. He is currently $2 million in debt, and the Federal Trade Commission will be highly interested in these international wire transfers." The room felt like the oxygen had been suddenly sucked out of it. My parents stared at Mason in absolute horror and disbelief. They had spent years worshipping their golden boy, bragging about his superior business acumen to their wealthy country club friends. Now the ugly truth was laid bare on the conference table for everyone to see. But Julian was not finished dismantling their perfect lives. He turned his sharp attention back to my shocked parents. The real question, Julian continued smoothly, was how Mason managed to secure his initial seed funding. "Your parents claim they proudly invested their life savings into his tech company. They claim Vivian drained their retirement accounts and left them entirely destitute." Julian pulled out the thickest folder from his briefcase and slammed it down directly in front of Barbara and Richard. My mother flinched physically, recoiling from the heavy stack of documents. "This is a comprehensive credit history report for my client Vivian," Julian explained, his voice turning dangerously cold and precise. "We discovered 8 separate credit cards and 3 high-interest personal loans opened in Vivian's name over the past 7 years. These fraudulent accounts were opened using her private social security number, her personal birth date, and her forged signature. The mailing addresses for these specific accounts were deliberately diverted to a hidden post office box, registered exclusively to Richard." My father gripped the edge of the table tightly, his knuckles turning stark white under the fluorescent lights. He looked slowly at my mother, who was suddenly trembling uncontrollably in her chair. Her fake tears had vanished completely, replaced by genuine, unadulterated terror. "You stole her identity," Julian stated, leaning forward to emphasize his accusation. "You opened fraudulent accounts in your own daughter's name, maxed them out to the tune of $250,000, and funneled every single penny into Mason's failing criminal enterprise. You destroyed her credit score to fund a pathetic Ponzi scheme. Then you had the absolute audacity to sit in this room today and demand $1 million settlement for fabricated emotional distress." I finally spoke up, breaking my long strategic silence. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished table, and looked directly into my mother's terrified eyes. "You called my investors mom," I said, my voice soft but deadly serious. "You tried to ruin my company by claiming I was financially abusing you both. But you are the real thieves sitting here today. You stole my identity to feed Mason's grandiose delusions of success. You committed wire fraud, identity theft, and massive bank fraud. You are looking at a decade in federal prison, and you handed me the perfect evidence on a silver platter by forcing this mandatory mediation." Gregory picked up the credit card statements and frantically scanned the highlighted sections. The aggressive bluster completely drained from the sleazy lawyer's face. His hands began to shake visibly as he realized the situation. Gregory dropped the credit card statements onto the table as if they were on fire. He pushed his chair back, scraping it loudly against the floor. "I cannot represent you," he stammered, looking frantically at my parents. "I was retained for a civil elder abuse claim. I was not informed about identity theft, wire fraud, or federal crimes. I am withdrawing as your legal counsel." He grabbed his briefcase and bolted for the door, leaving them defenseless. My father called him back, but his voice cracked. The room plunged into silence, but the energy had shifted. Their unified front was rapidly fracturing. Maya snatched the financial binder from the table. Her manicured nails dug into the paper as she flipped through the pages Julian had highlighted. Her eyes darted across the bank statements, the debt notices, and the fraudulent charges. Maya built her entire identity around being a high society wife. She flaunted designer bags and lavish vacations on every social platform. She looked down on everyone because she believed she had secured effortless luxury. Now she was reading the undeniable proof that her entire existence was a carefully constructed mirage. $2 million in debt. Maya whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and fury. She looked up slowly, locking her fierce dark eyes onto Mason. $2 million. You told me the company was preparing for a buyout. You told me the venture capitalists were begging to invest. Mason held up his hands in a desperate gesture of surrender. Maya, please calm down, he pleaded weakly. I can fix this. I just need a little more time to secure funding. We are experiencing a temporary cash flow problem. A temporary cash flow problem? Maya shrieked, slamming the binder down. You are running a Ponzi scheme, Mason. You are a criminal. You stole from your sick sister to buy my engagement ring. You financed our honeymoon with stolen credit cards. You are not a visionary entrepreneur. You are a broke fraud. Mason shrank back, looking absolutely terrified of his wife. He always relied on his parents to shield him from consequences, but they were paralyzed by their own impending legal ruin. Do not dare speak to my son that way, Barbara shrieked, finding her voice. My mother slammed her hands on the table. Mason did everything to give you the life you demanded. You are a greedy gold digger, Maya. You bled him dry with your demands for luxury clothes and vacations. You are the reason he had to find creative ways to generate income. Maya whipped her head to face my mother, her expression twisting into pure rage. Creative ways to generate income, Maya repeated, dripping with sarcasm. You call identity theft and wire fraud creative. You are as delusional as he is, Barbara. Do not play the protective mother. You stole your own daughter's identity to fund this illusion. You are a criminal. You are going to prison. You ungrateful witch! My mother screamed, lunging across the table. She pointed a finger in Maya's face. We welcomed you into this family. We treated you like royalty. We gave you everything. You gave me stolen money, Maya roared back, standing up. You brought me into a family of broke, desperate scammers. I married Mason because he promised me a lifestyle. I am not going down with this sinking ship. I am not taking on illegal debt because you raised a useless man-child who cannot hold a job. Mason stood up, trying to intervene. Mom, stop, he begged, grabbing Barbara's arm. Maya, please listen to me. I love you. We can figure this out. Do not touch me. Maya snarled, slapping Mason's hand away. I am calling a divorce lawyer the second I walk out of this building. I am reporting every single one of your hidden assets to the authorities to protect myself from your federal charges. You are on your own, Mason. You and your psychotic, thieving parents. The mediation room devolved into a war zone. My father Richard sat frozen, gripping his chest as he watched his golden family tear each other apart like starving wolves. My mother and Maya continued to scream vile insults at each other. Mason buried his face in his hands, sobbing like a disciplined child. Julian and I sat back in our chairs watching the spectacular implosion. We did not need to say a single word. By simply exposing the financial truth, we had triggered a chain reaction that destroyed their entire foundation. They were doing the work for us, turning on each other immediately. I leaned over to Julian, a satisfied smile playing on my lips. Let them fight, I whispered. It saves us the trouble. Suddenly, Barbara stopped screaming at Maya. She turned her wild, desperate eyes toward me. Her chest heaved as she struggled to catch her breath. Her fake victim persona was entirely gone. You think you have won, Vivian? Barbara hissed, her face red and blotchy. You think bank statements will stop me. You exposed Mason, but you forget one crucial detail. I still own the house. Richard and I hold the deed to the family estate. You have no legal claim to that property. I swear that I will sell it and give every single penny to Mason. She stepped away from the table, grabbing her purse. In fact, Barbara announced, her voice rising in a desperate bid to reclaim power. This Sunday, I am hosting a banquet. I am inviting the entire extended family and our society friends. Right there in front of everyone, I am going to sign the estate over to Mason. I will publicly disinherit you, Vivian. I will make sure everyone knows. I watched her storm toward the door, dragging my defeated father behind her. Mason and Maya followed, still screaming at each other. They believed the house was their ultimate trump card, their untouchable fortress. I just smiled, letting them walk right into my final devastating trap. Julian and I walked out of the mediation center into the crisp air. The chaotic screaming of my family still echoed faintly in the parking garage, but I felt nothing but absolute clarity. They showed their true colors, choosing spite over logic. Barbara actually believed she still held power over me. She believed the house was her impenetrable fortress. I turned to Julian before getting into my car. I want every single document prepared and verified by Friday, I told him. I want the original property deed, the formal eviction notices, and a certified summary of Mason's fraudulent transfers. Have the asset recovery team on standby. Julian nodded, returning my cold smile. I will hire private security and a uniformed bailiff for Sunday, he replied. We will make sure this is executed flawlessly. I drove back to my downtown penthouse, the sprawling luxury apartment I had purchased with my own success. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I had spent 10 years playing the obedient financial provider to keep my parents afloat. Now they were attempting to disinherit me from a property I legally owned to reward a brother who stole my identity. The sheer audacity of Barbara's plan to host a banquet to publicly humiliate me was almost poetic. She wanted a stage. I was going to give her a spectacular show. The next morning, I convened an emergency meeting with my executive team, including my head of public relations and my lead corporate attorney. We sat around the massive glass table in my boardroom, finalizing the strategy. I slid the thick legal folders across the table. I want no leaks to the press, I instructed my team. Let them climb as high as they want. The higher they are, the harder the impact. My public relations director looked concerned. Vivian, your sister-in-law is highly active on social media. She has a sizable following from her lifestyle blog. If she realizes she is losing her wealth, she might attempt a smear campaign to extort a settlement. I leaned back in my chair. Let her post whatever she wants, I said firmly. Do not issue any statements. Do not block her. Let her dig the hole as deep as possible. Truth is an absolute defense, and we hold all the receipts. My prediction materialized faster than I anticipated. Maya was furious that Mason was broke and terrified of losing her elite social status. She knew the federal authorities were likely going to investigate Mason for his Ponzi scheme. Instead of walking away quietly, Maya decided to weaponize her remaining asset, which was her pregnant belly. She wanted to create public outrage, hoping to force me into paying her a massive settlement to protect my company's reputation. On Thursday evening, my phone began vibrating continuously. Notifications flooded my screen in a rapid, relentless stream. My assistant sent me a link to a video Maya had just posted across all her social media platforms. The video was already gaining massive traction, accumulating thousands of views and shares within minutes. I clicked the link and watched Maya deliver the performance of a lifetime. She sat in her dimly lit living room wearing no makeup and a simple oversized sweater to emphasize her pregnancy. She stared directly into the camera, her eyes wide and brimming with perfectly timed tears. Hi, everyone. Maya began, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. I usually only share happy moments here, but my family is going through an unimaginable nightmare. My sister-in-law, Vivian, is the CEO of a major financial tech company. She is incredibly wealthy, but she is also a cold-blooded monster. Maya wiped a tear from her cheek, holding up a tissue for dramatic effect. For no reason other than pure greed, Vivian has decided to throw my elderly in-laws out onto the street. She manipulated their finances and tricked them. But the worst part is that Vivian knows I am 6 months pregnant with her own nephew. She is actively trying to evict a pregnant woman and leave my unborn baby homeless just so she can add another property to her massive real estate portfolio. Please share this video. The world needs to know what kind of ruthless corporate bully she really is. The video was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She omitted the identity theft. She omitted Mason's fraudulent business. She omitted the fact that I had bought the house to save my parents from foreclosure. She simply painted me as a billionaire tech villain crushing a vulnerable family. The internet loves a victim, and Maya played the role flawlessly. Within hours, the fallout was intense. My phone was inundated with hateful text messages from distant aunts and cousins who had seen the video. How could you be so evil to your own mother, one aunt texted. I hope your company burns to the ground, an uncle wrote. Strangers began leaving aggressive comments on my company's social media pages, calling for boycotts and demanding I step down. The digital mob was demanding blood based entirely on a fabricated narrative. My phone rang. It was Julian. "Have you seen the video?" he asked, his voice tight with professional concern. "Yes," I replied calmly. "We need to issue a cease and desist immediately, Vivian. This crosses the line into defamation." "No," I said, my voice steady. "Let the video stay up. Let everyone share it. They are hosting a banquet this Sunday to celebrate their triumph. They think public pressure will force me to hand over the house deed." I stood up and walked to my penthouse window, looking down at the bustling city below. "Confirm the private security detail for Sunday. Confirm the bailiff. Maya wants a public audience and my mother wants a public disinheritance. We are going to give them exactly what they asked for. The only difference is I am bringing the truth." Sunday morning finally arrived, bringing a sense of ultimate clarity. I spent the early hours reviewing the finalized legal documents with Julian. Every signature was authenticated, and the eviction notice was stamped. My private security detail arrived at noon. They were two imposing men who radiated silent authority. We went over the logistics. There would be no physical altercations, but we needed a secure perimeter to ensure the bailiff could legally serve the documents. I dressed in a tailored crimson suit. I was executing a corporate takeover of my own life. Across town, Barbara and Richard transformed the house I owned into a lavish banquet hall. A catering company set up a massive buffet while a string quartet played softly. 50 guests filled the living spaces, a mix of extended family and wealthy acquaintances who had not yet realized Mason was a fraud. The viral video from Maya saturated their circles, creating false sympathy. Relatives whispered about my supposed cruelty while praising Barbara today. Barbara and Richard played the part of wounded parents flawlessly. My mother wore an elegant pearl necklace, bravely enduring her tragic circumstances. Maya stood by Mason, holding her pregnant belly, prominently accepting condolences and outraged support from the aunts and uncles. They believed the digital mob had secured their victory and that I was hiding in shame. At 2 precisely, Barbara tapped her spoon against a crystal flute. The sharp ringing sound cut through the murmurs, bringing the crowded room to a respectful silence. She stood at the head of the dining table, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "Thank you all for being here today," Barbara began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "As many of you know, our family is navigating an incredibly dark chapter. We have faced unimaginable betrayal from someone we loved. Looking around this room, I am reminded that true family is defined by loyalty." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the guests. Maya wiped away a fake tear, leaning her head against Mason. Barbara continued, raising her chin bravely. "Richard and I refuse to let greed destroy our legacy. We are moving forward to protect the people who value this family. Today, we are formally transferring the entire estate into a secure trust. We are signing the new deed over to our devoted son Mason and his beautiful wife Maya, ensuring their growing family always has a sanctuary here." The guests broke into enthusiastic applause. Mason smiled proudly, stepping forward as Richard handed him a heavy symbolic brass key. It was a sickening display of arrogance built entirely on stolen money and identity theft. They were celebrating a triumphant victory that did not actually exist. That was the exact moment I signaled my security team. The heavy double doors of the front entrance swung open with a resounding crash. The string quartet stopped playing instantly. 50 heads turned simultaneously toward the foyer. I strode into the dining room, flanked by my two massive security guards. Julian walked calmly to my left, carrying his leather briefcase, and a uniformed county bailiff marched to my right. The room descended into absolute dead silence. The collective shock was palpable. The smug smile from Mason vanished instantly. Maya gasped, taking a sudden backward step. "What are you doing here?" Barbara shrieked, breaking the silence. Her face turned a violent shade of red. "Get out of my house immediately! You are trespassing. I am calling the police right now, Vivian." I ignored her completely. I did not raise my voice or break my stride. I walked straight down the center of the room, the crowd parting instinctively to let my security detail pass. I stopped right at the head of the table, facing my trembling parents and my terrified brother. I picked up a spare champagne flute from the table and held it up in a mock toast. "Congratulations, Mason," I announced, my voice echoing clearly through the room. I wanted to be here to personally congratulate you on inheriting a completely worthless piece of paper. Richard slammed his fist on the table. You have no right to speak to us this way, Vivian. We just signed the deed over. This house belongs to your brother now. Leave before we have you arrested. I set the glass down and turned to Julian. He opened his briefcase and handed me a small remote control. I pointed the remote at the smart television mounted on the living room wall. I pressed the button, casting my tablet screen directly to the display. The screen flashed to life, illuminating the room with a scan of the authentic property deed. I suggest you read the owner name, Dad, I said, pointing at the glowing screen. The guests leaned in, squinting at the television. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the realization hit them. Printed clearly in bold black ink under the registered ownership section was not Richard or Barbara. It read, Vivian LLC. 5 years ago, I projected my voice so every guest could hear the undeniable truth. My parents took out a secret second mortgage to pay off the gambling debts from Mason. They defaulted. The bank was 30 days away from foreclosing on this property and throwing them onto the street. They hid it from everyone present here. Barbara stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the dining table for support. Mason stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a trapped fish. I did not just pay your mortgage. I continued, stepping closer to my parents. I used my private corporate entity to purchase your debt from the bank. I saved you from financial ruin. I have not been paying your bills on your behalf for the last 5 years. I have been paying my own property taxes. I am the sole legal owner of this estate. You are my tenants. You have been living in my house rent-free for half a decade, and you cannot bequeath a house you do not own. The reality of my words crashed down on the dining room. The elite guests who had just been applauding my parents shrank back, exchanging horrified whispers. My mother gasped, clutching her pearl necklace as if it were choking her. My father leaned against the table, his face draining of color. He looked from the glowing television screen displaying my legal deed to the stunned faces of his friends. The illusion of his success was shattered. I slowly turned to the uniformed county bailiff standing by my side. He stepped forward, presenting a crisp manila envelope. By the power vested in me by the county court, he announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "You are hereby served with a 30-day notice of eviction." He placed the heavy envelope directly onto the table, right over the fake will they had just proudly signed. You have exactly 1 month to vacate this property, or law enforcement will physically remove you and your belongings from the premises. My mother let out a piercing shriek. You cannot do this, she wailed, grabbing the envelope and trying to shove it back at the bailiff. This is my home, Vivian. You are an evil, vindictive child. We fed and raised you. We gave you everything. I looked at her with absolute zero sympathy. You gave me highly conditional approval and absolutely endless financial demands, I replied, my steady voice echoing clearly in the stunned, silent room. You stole my identity to fund a criminal enterprise, and then tried to sue me for elder abuse when the free money stopped flowing. This is not cruelty, Mom. This is just the long overdue consequence of your own greed. My father clutched his chest, suddenly letting out a sharp gasp. He stumbled backward, collapsing heavily into one of the velvet dining chairs. His breathing grew shallow and erratic. Several aunts and uncles rushed forward out of instinct but quickly stopped themselves, hesitating to help a man who had just been exposed as a massive fraud. Even in his vulnerable moment of sudden physical distress, his wealthy country club friends were already turning their backs swiftly, wanting absolutely nothing to do with a messy public scandal. Mason, however, did not freeze. Humiliated beyond repair and watching his promised fortune vanish into thin air, my brother completely lost his mind. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. You ruined my life, he roared, his voice cracking. Mason violently lunged across the table, aiming his fists directly at me. He never even made it halfway. My private security guards moved with terrifying speed. Before Mason could take another step, they intercepted him. One guard grabbed Mason by the shoulder while the other swept his legs out from under him. They slammed my brother face first into the expensive hardwood floor, pinning his arms sharply behind his back. Mason thrashed and screamed, spitting obscenities as the guards held him completely immobilized. Maya backed away in sheer horror, covering her mouth. She looked around the room at the guests who were now filming the spectacle on their smartphones. "I am leaving!" she sobbed hysterically, grabbing her designer purse. "I want a swift divorce, Mason. I am certainly not going to prison for you." Maya turned rapidly and fled directly through the heavy front doors, desperately running away from the sinking ship she had aggressively helped to build. I watched my toxic family collapse, feeling no regret. I turned to Julian, who was quietly packing his briefcase. "We are done here," I told him calmly. "Let us go home." I walked out of the house, leaving my mother weeping over my father and my brother, pinned to the floor. Exactly 1 month later, the dust finally settled over our fractured family, and the resulting karma was swift and absolute. Mason was formally indicted by federal investigators for his fraudulent business practices and identity theft. Maya followed through on her threat, immediately filing for divorce and attempting to sue Mason for emotional damages just to distance herself from his crimes. Of course, there was no money left for her to take. My parents failed to fight the eviction. Their bank accounts permanently frozen, they were humiliatingly forced to pack whatever meager belongings fit into a cheap rented truck. Barbara and Richard moved into a tiny low-income apartment on the outskirts of the city, isolated and alone. Meanwhile, my life accelerated into a brilliant new chapter. The footage from the banquet inevitably leaked online, completely vindicating me. The public backlash against Maya and my parents was fierce, swiftly clearing my name and restoring my corporate flawless reputation. My investors were thrilled, and my firm successfully launched its initial public offering. I became a multimillionaire overnight, celebrated not just for my business acumen, but for my resilience. I stood on the expansive balcony of my brand new luxury penthouse, looking out over the glittering, brightly lit city skyline. The evening air was crisp and incredibly refreshing. Inside my apartment, my executive team was popping champagne to celebrate our historic market debut. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a text message from an unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was from. "Vivian. Please," the message read. "We are struggling so much. Your father is sick and we cannot afford rent. I am so sorry for everything. Please forgive us." I stared at the desperate, groveling words from my mother. 5 long years ago, reading that exact same message might have completely broken my fragile heart. Today, it meant absolutely nothing. I did not type a reply. I did not block the number. I simply smiled, peacefully tossed the expensive smartphone directly into the nearby metal trash can, and permanently turned my back on the toxic past. I walked inside to join the people who genuinely valued me, ready to embrace the magnificent, limitless future I had built entirely on my own. My assistant nodded as I finalized the security details for Sunday. "Let them climb as high as they want," I told her. "The higher they are, the harder the impact." I had no idea just how high Maya was desperately trying to climb in her panic. Maya was a woman who lived her entire life through the lens of social media. Her self-worth was directly tied to her follower count and the illusion of a perfect wealthy lifestyle. After the disastrous mediation session, she realized that her husband was a massive fraud. Mason had zero money and zero prospects. Instead of leaving him immediately, she realized she needed a scapegoat. She needed a way to salvage her public image and potentially extort a massive settlement from me before my company went public. If she could paint me as a corporate monster, she might force me to pay her off to save my reputation. On Thursday evening, I was sitting in my penthouse reviewing the final eviction documents when my phone began to vibrate violently. It was not just a few notifications. The device buzzed continuously, sliding across the glass coffee table with the sheer volume of incoming alerts. My chief public relations officer called me, directly overriding the silent mode. "You need to open Instagram right now, Vivian," he said, his voice tight with panic. "Your sister-in-law just dropped a nuclear bomb on our timeline." I opened the application and immediately saw Maya's face occupying the top trending spot. She had carefully crafted the perfect victim narrative. She sat on the floor of my parents' living room wearing a baggy gray sweater that prominently displayed her 6-month pregnant belly. Her usually flawless makeup was entirely absent. Her hair was messy and her eyes were red and puffy from crying. It was an Oscar-worthy performance designed specifically to manipulate the internet. "Hi, everyone," Maya said to the camera, her voice trembling perfectly. "I usually only share happy moments with you, but my family is facing an unimaginable nightmare tonight. I am terrified, and I do not know where else to turn." She wiped a tear away, sniffing softly. "My sister-in-law Vivian is the chief executive officer of a massive financial tech company. She is a billionaire who owns multiple properties across the country. But out of pure greed and spite, she has decided to destroy our family. She manipulated my elderly parents into signing over the deed to their only home. Now she is legally forcing them out onto the freezing streets." Maya placed a protective hand over her pregnant stomach, looking directly into the camera lens with wide, innocent eyes. "But the most horrifying part is that Vivian knows I am carrying her nephew. We are expecting a baby in 3 months. My husband lost his job and we moved in with his parents to save money. Vivian is actively evicting a pregnant woman. She is throwing a defenseless unborn baby out into the winter cold just so she can sell the house and add another few $1 million to her corporate bank account. Please share this video. The world needs to know exactly what kind of ruthless monster she really is. Do not let her hide behind her corporate feminist empowerment brand. She is a bully who preys on the elderly and the unborn." I watched the video end and immediately noticed the engagement metrics. In less than 2 hours, the video had accumulated 4 million views. It was spreading across every major platform like wildfire. The digital mob had been fully mobilized. Internet strangers love a villain, and Maya had painted me as the ultimate corporate sociopath. My personal phone number somehow leaked online. I began receiving hundreds of vitriolic text messages every single minute. Distant aunts and cousins who had not spoken to me in a decade suddenly felt entitled to text me vile insults. "How could you be so evil to your own mother?" one aunt texted. "You are a disgrace to this family," an uncle wrote. "I hope your company burns to the ground and you lose everything," a cousin added. The harassment quickly spilled over from personal attacks to professional sabotage. Outraged strangers began coordinating massive spam campaigns against my company's social media pages. They left thousands of one-star reviews on our application platform. They tagged our venture capital investors, demanding that I be immediately removed as the chief executive officer. People were threatening to protest outside our corporate headquarters. My public relations director called me back, his voice shaking. "Vivian, we are losing control of the narrative," he warned. "The financial blogs are picking up the story. They are framing this as a massive ethical scandal right before our initial public offering. If we do not issue a statement or send a cease and desist immediately, the board of directors might panic. They could force you to step down to save the public offering. Maya is extorting us. She knows we are vulnerable right now." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse and looked down at the glowing city streets. I could feel the intense external pressure mounting, attempting to crush me into submission. This was exactly what Maya and my parents wanted. They wanted to humiliate me globally. They believed that if they screamed loud enough and turned the whole world against me, I would eventually break. They thought I would hand over the house deed and write them a massive check just to make the viral nightmare stop. They thought my fear of losing my company would override my demand for justice. I took a deep breath, letting the cold logic wash over my mind. "Do not issue any statements," I told my public relations director firmly. "Do not engage with the comments and absolutely do not contact Maya. Let the viral video stay up. Let everyone share it and believe her lies." I smiled sharply, holding my ground as I watched the digital chaos unfold across the glowing screens in front of me. The trap is now perfectly set for Sunday. My public relations director remained silent on the other end of the line, trying to process my command. "Vivian," he finally said, his voice tight with professional anxiety. "If we do not respond by tomorrow morning, the narrative will solidify. The board of directors will demand answers." "I want you to schedule a full board meeting for Monday morning," I replied smoothly. "Tell them I will present a complete resolution to the public relations crisis then. Until that moment, absolute silence is our strongest weapon. Let Maya have her 15 minutes of internet fame. Let the digital mob sharpen their pitchforks and scream for my downfall. I am perfectly comfortable playing the villain in her fabricated tragedy because I know exactly how this story ends. Truth is an absolute defense, and we hold every single receipt." I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the plush sofa. The screen continued to light up with hateful notifications, but I felt no anxiety. I felt an exhilarating sense of control. Maya believed she was destroying me, but she was actually amplifying her own upcoming humiliation. When the truth inevitably leaked, the backlash against her would be biblical. She was building a massive audience for her own spectacular destruction. Friday morning arrived with gray skies and a crisp chill in the air. I did not go into the corporate office. Instead, I transformed my penthouse dining table into a tactical command center. My first call was to an elite private security firm that specialized in high net worth asset protection and hostile corporate extractions. I needed professionals who could handle a volatile domestic situation without breaking a sweat. The security director assured me he would send his two most imposing operatives. They were instructed to remain completely silent, maintain a physical perimeter, and prevent any physical altercations. My brother Mason had a history of throwing temper tantrums when cornered, and I was not going to let him lay a single finger on me. Next, I conferenced in Julian, my lead corporate attorney. We needed to ensure the legal execution of the eviction was airtight. Julian confirmed that a uniformed county bailiff had been successfully retained for Sunday afternoon. The bailiff would officially serve the 30-day notice of eviction directly into the hands of my parents and Mason. It was a crucial detail. I did not just want to verbally inform them that they were losing the house. I wanted the cold, hard reality of the justice system to be physically handed to them in front of their elite social circle. As Friday bled into Saturday, the digital storm outside my penthouse reached a fever pitch. Opinion articles popped up on minor tech blogs analyzing my supposed ethical failures. Former high school classmates who had not spoken to me in 15 years suddenly posted lengthy paragraphs on social media claiming they always knew I was a toxic person. Distant relatives created group chats entirely dedicated to plotting my financial ruin. They fed off Maya's perfectly edited tears, reveling in the shared outrage. Yet inside my apartment, the atmosphere was remarkably serene. I poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee and stood by the glass windows, watching the city move below me. 10 years ago, this level of collective hatred would have crushed my spirit. When I was 25, lying in a hospital bed with a ruptured appendix and drowning in medical debt, I would have begged for their forgiveness. I would have sacrificed everything to earn their conditional love. But I was no longer that frightened girl. I was a self-made multimillionaire who had survived their financial abuse and built an empire from the ashes. Their digital screaming was just background noise to me now. They were entirely powerless against the fortress I had constructed around my life. Saturday evening descended, bringing a quiet, intense anticipation. I walked into my expansive walk-in closet to select my armor for the following day. This was not just a family gathering. This was a hostile takeover. I bypassed the neutral corporate grays and safe navy blues. My fingers brushed against a brilliantly tailored crimson suit. The fabric was sharp, striking, and impossible to ignore. It was the color of absolute, undeniable authority. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and black stiletto heels. I wanted to look like the executioner of their false reality. I laid the garments out meticulously, ensuring every single detail was entirely perfect. I received a final text message from Julian, confirming that the authentic property deed was printed on high-quality legal paper and safely secured inside his leather briefcase. The eviction notices were officially stamped by the county court. The security team had mapped out the property and established their strict entry protocols. Everything was locked completely in place. I walked into my kitchen and poured a single glass of expensive red wine. I did not turn on the television or check my flooded social media feeds. I simply sat in the quiet luxury of my home, savoring the final moments of peace before the inevitable explosion. My mother Barbara was currently miles away, likely directing caterers and polishing silver for her grand Sunday banquet. She was preparing to stand in front of 50 guests and officially sign away a house she did not own to a son who was a federal criminal. She truly believed she had won the ultimate victory. She deeply believed the viral video had permanently broken me. She had absolutely no idea that a massive wrecking ball was hurtling directly toward her carefully constructed illusion. I took a slow sip of my wine, tasting the rich, complex flavors. I was completely unbothered by the chaos they had tried to inflict upon my life. I was fully ready to walk into the lion's den and tear it apart. I went to bed that night and slept deeply, dreaming of swift justice. Sunday morning broke with brilliant sunshine casting a deceptive warmth over the city. I woke up feeling completely energized and ready to execute the final phase of my plan. I stepped into my tailored crimson suit, adjusting the crisp white silk blouse underneath. I checked my reflection in the mirror, seeing a woman entirely unburdened by guilt or fear. My phone buzzed with a quick message from Julian, confirming that the security team was briefed and the county bailiff was standing by. I grabbed my car keys and headed out, leaving the quiet sanctuary of my penthouse behind. Across town in the sprawling suburban neighborhood, the atmosphere was vastly different. The house that I legally owned had been transformed into a lavish banquet hall. Barbara and Richard had spared absolutely no expense to celebrate their fabricated victory. A professional catering team moved swiftly through the kitchen, preparing a gourmet buffet. A string quartet situated in the corner of the grand living room played soft classical music. The mahogany dining table was draped in expensive white linen and adorned with towering floral arrangements. 50 guests filled the expansive living spaces, creating a cacophony of overlapping conversations. The attendees were a carefully curated mix of extended family members and wealthy acquaintances from my parents' country club. These were the local elites who prided themselves on moral superiority. They clutched crystal glasses filled with imported champagne, whispering excitedly among themselves. The sole topic of their gossip was the viral video Maya had posted just days prior. They had all seen her crocodile tears and heard her horrific lies about my supposed cruelty. Not a single person in that house realized they were standing in the middle of a massive financial delusion. The guests actively praised Barbara and Richard for their remarkable resilience. Distant aunts and uncles patted my father on the back, offering their solemn condolences for having such a terrible daughter. Wealthy friends leaned in to whisper words of encouragement to my mother, commending her strength in the face of such aggressive corporate bullying. Maya stood near the fireplace, glowing under the undivided attention of the crowd. She cradled her pregnant belly, prominently soaking up the absolute sympathy from every person who approached her. Mason hovered right beside her, puffing out his chest and playing the role of the protective, strong husband perfectly. He accepted the sympathetic handshakes with a stoic expression, completely ignoring the fact that federal investigators were likely already building a criminal case against him. They were entirely oblivious to the impending disaster. They believed the internet mob had successfully destroyed my spirit and secured their claim to the property. At exactly 2 o'clock, Barbara decided it was time to elevate her theatrical performance to the main stage. She stepped toward the center of the grand living room, positioning herself right next to the towering floral centerpiece. She picked up a silver spoon and gently clinked it against the side of her crystal champagne flute. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the low hum of gossip, bringing the crowded room to an immediate, respectful silence. The string quartet stopped playing, allowing the heavy anticipation to settle over the guests. 50 heads turned simultaneously to watch my mother. She lowered the spoon and took a deep, trembling breath. Her face was a masterful mask of tragic bravery. Thank you all for being here with us today. Barbara began, her voice quivering with perfectly practiced emotion. As many of you know, our family is currently navigating an incredibly dark and painful chapter. We have faced unimaginable betrayal from someone we loved and nurtured. She paused to dab the corner of her eye with a lace handkerchief, ensuring everyone saw her raw vulnerability. Looking around this magnificent room, I am reminded that true family is not always defined by blood. It is defined by loyalty and unwavering support. We have been tested severely this week, but your presence today gives us the strength to stand tall. Richard and I refuse to let greed and malice destroy our family legacy. We are moving forward to protect the people who truly value us and who embody the real meaning of devotion. Soft murmurs of agreement rippled through the captivated audience. Maya wiped away a fake tear, resting her head gently against Mason's shoulder. Barbara continued, raising her chin with an air of absolute defiance. We have learned that we must secure our future against those who wish to tear it down, she announced, her voice echoing clearly across the silent room. Therefore, we are officially transferring the entire estate into a secure protective trust. We are signing the new deed over to our devoted son Mason and his beautiful wife Maya. We want to ensure their growing family always has a safe, permanent sanctuary here within these walls, free from any outside threats or corporate greed. The guests broke into enthusiastic, thunderous applause. The country club elites nodded their heads in solemn approval of this righteous decision. Mason smiled a wide, arrogant smile and stepped forward into the center of the room to join his mother. Richard reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a large decorative brass key. He handed the symbolic key directly to Mason, clapping him proudly on the shoulder. Mason gripped the key tightly, raising it slightly for the audience to see. It was a sickening display of complete arrogance, built entirely on stolen money and identity theft. They were openly celebrating a triumphant victory that did not actually exist. They were bequeathing a massive estate that they had legally surrendered 5 years ago. They had absolutely no idea that I was already walking up the front steps, ready to obliterate their entire world. The heavy oak doors of the estate swung open with a crash that echoed like a gunshot over the polite applause of the dining room. I strode through the grand entryway, flanked by my carefully selected entourage. On my left and right were 2 private security contractors, dressed in dark suits, their physical presence radiating an intimidating, silent authority. Behind them walked Julian, my lead corporate attorney, carrying his trademark leather briefcase. Bringing up the rear was a fully uniformed county bailiff, his official badge catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. We moved in a synchronized formation, marching directly toward the heart of the celebration. My crimson suit cut a sharp, defiant line through the sea of pastel dresses and gray suits worn by the wealthy guests. The force of our entry shattered the curated illusion my parents had built. The string quartet, playing a celebratory tune, abruptly stopped mid-note, the cellist lowering his bow in shock. The enthusiastic applause for Mason died instantly, replaced by a wave of sharp gasps and horrified whispers. 50 heads turned to watch my approach, their expressions shifting rapidly from polite celebration to unadulterated panic. The high society friends who had just been praising my parents shrank back against the walls, clearing a wide path for me and my security detail. They stared at the uniformed bailiff, murmuring anxiously to one another about the sudden appearance of law enforcement at a private country club gathering. Barbara stood frozen at the head of the dining table, her hand hovering in the air where she had just passed the symbolic brass key to Mason. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified under the bright dining room lights. Richard gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white as he stared at Julian, recognizing the corporate lawyer who had dismantled them during the mediation session just days ago. Maya took a sudden step backward, bumping heavily into the extravagant floral arrangement, her hands flying up to protect her pregnant belly. The smug, victorious smile that Mason had been wearing vanished, replaced by a look of panicked confusion. He clutched the fake brass key to his chest, as if it could protect him from the reality storming into his living room. For 3 long seconds, nobody breathed. Then my mother finally found her voice. Her initial shock violently morphed into pure defensive rage. "What on earth do you think you are doing?" Barbara shrieked, her voice piercing the tense silence of the dining room. Her face turned a violent shade of red as she pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "Get out of my house right this instant, Vivian. You are trespassing. You have no right to be here today. You have ruined enough lives with your corporate greed." I did not stop walking. I did not flinch or react to her hysterical screaming. I maintained a steady, confident pace, my black stiletto heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor. The rhythmic sound of my footsteps amplified the mounting dread in the room. Richard stepped forward, puffing out his chest in a desperate attempt to assert control in front of his wealthy peers. "Vivian, you need to leave right now," my father commanded, his voice wavering slightly, despite his efforts to sound authoritative. "This is a private family event. We are celebrating your brother. You are attempting to cause a scene. If you do not turn around and walk out that front door immediately, I am calling the police and pressing charges for trespassing." I ignored his empty threats. I knew the law, and I knew who owned the ground he was standing on. My security guards stepped ahead of me, using their frames to create an impenetrable physical barrier between my family and me. They did not touch anyone, but their imposing stance made it clear that neither Richard nor Mason would be allowed to step within 5 feet of me. I walked straight up to the head of the elaborate dining table, stopping right in front of the tiered cake ordered to celebrate Mason's fabricated inheritance. I looked directly into my mother's furious, terrified eyes. Then I shifted my gaze to Mason, who was sweating under the intense scrutiny of the entire room. I reached out and picked up a crystal champagne flute from the table. The glass was full of expensive imported champagne purchased with money they had stolen by defrauding investors and ruining my credit score. I held the glass high, letting the crystal catch the light from the chandeliers above. I looked around the room, making deliberate eye contact with the wealthy aunts, uncles, and society friends who had spent the last 3 days condemning me on the internet based on a fabricated viral video. I wanted all of them to hear every word I was about to say. I wanted them to witness the exact moment the illusion was permanently shattered. "Congratulations, Mason!" I announced, my voice ringing loud, clear, and unwavering through the stunned, silent room. "I wanted to be here today to congratulate you on this incredibly momentous occasion. You have always been the golden child of this family, and today you are receiving exactly what you deserve." Mason blinked in confusion, his grip on the brass key loosening slightly. Maya stared at me, her dark eyes narrowing with suspicion. Barbara let out an indignant scoff, attempting to interrupt me again, but the uniformed bailiff stepped forward, placing a hand near his duty belt. The sight of the armed county official silenced my mother, forcing her to swallow her words. I smiled, a slow, calculated smile that made my brother physically recoil. I raised the champagne flute slightly higher, looking directly at the fake will they had proudly displayed on the center of the table. "I just wanted to officially congratulate you, Mason," I repeated, letting the silence build for maximum dramatic effect on inheriting a worthless piece of paper. I lowered the champagne flute and handed it calmly to the security guard standing to my left. From his leather briefcase, Julian withdrew a sleek silver tablet and passed it into my waiting hands. The massive smart television mounted above the marble fireplace was currently displaying a slideshow of meticulously curated family photographs depicting false memories of joy and unity. With 2 deliberate taps on the glass screen of my tablet, I hijacked the wireless connection. The smiling images of Mason and Maya vanished instantly into blackness. A collective murmur of confusion swept through the wealthy attendees. My father took a frantic step forward, attempting to grab the television remote from the mantel, but my second security guard shifted his weight, blocking the path completely. The 80-inch screen flared back to life, illuminating the dimly lit dining room with the glaring white background of a highly classified legal document. I swiped my fingers across the tablet, zooming in directly on the center of the projected image so that even the guests standing in the farthest corners of the room could read the bold black text. I suggest you all read the registered ownership section, I instructed, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The guests leaned in, squinting at the glowing television. A unified, sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd as the realization hit them like a physical blow. Printed clearly and irrevocably under the property owner designation was not the name of Richard or Barbara. It read Vivian LLC. My mother stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the dining table for support. Her knuckles turned stark white as she stared at the screen. Mason stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as he looked from the fake paper will in his hands to the undeniable legal deed projected above him. Maya dropped her designer clutch, letting it hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. 5 years ago, I projected my voice so every single person in the room could hear the absolute truth. My parents were exactly 7 days away from total financial ruin. They were facing imminent foreclosure and were about to be thrown out onto the street. They hid this catastrophic failure from everyone present here today. I paced slowly along the edge of the long dining table, forcing the high society guests to look me in the eye. They were losing this house because they had taken out a massive secret second mortgage. They drained the equity of this estate to pay off hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal gambling debts, racked up by the golden child you are all celebrating today. I pointed a steady finger directly at Mason. The crowd erupted into shocked whispers. Aunts and uncles who had just been praising Mason now stared at him in utter disgust. The country club friends began backing away from my parents as if their financial failure was a contagious disease. "You are lying!" Barbara screamed, her voice cracking with pure panic. She lunged toward the television but halted when the uniformed bailiff placed a firm hand on his utility belt. "Tell them you are lying, Vivian. We pay the mortgage every single month. We send the checks directly to the bank. You send the checks to a payment portal managed by my private corporate entity." I corrected her, my tone dripping with freezing absolute authority. "I did not just step in and pay your mortgage on your behalf. I used my private holding company to purchase your defaulted debt directly from the bank. I saved you from absolute bankruptcy and utter public humiliation. I bought this entire estate outright. I have not been paying your bills for the last 5 years, Mom. I have been paying my own property taxes. I am the sole legal owner of this entire estate." The guests gasped loudly as the sheer magnitude of the deception crashed down upon them. My father swayed unsteadily, his face draining of all color as he looked around at the horrified faces of his peers. The illusion of his success was entirely shattered. The reputation he valued over his own daughter was disintegrating in real time. "You have been my tenants," I continued, stepping closer to my trembling parents. "You have been living in my house as renters for half a decade. You did not even notice the ownership transfer because I kept your payment schedule identical to prevent you from facing the reality of your own failures. And the inheritance you just so proudly bestowed upon your son, the grand legacy you transferred with that ridiculous brass key, it does not exist. You cannot bequeath a house you do not legally own." The silence in the dining room became suffocating. The reality of my words paralyzed everyone present. Maya grabbed Mason by the collar of his expensive suit, shaking him violently. "Is this true?" she demanded, her voice shrill with rising hysteria. "Tell me you actually own something, Mason. Tell me we are not broke." Mason could not meet her furious gaze. He stared down at the floor, completely broken and humiliated in front of the elite social circle he desperately craved to impress. He was exposed as a complete fraud, drowning in debt, and entirely dependent on the sister he had so casually discarded. Barbara fell to her knees, weeping hysterically onto the Persian rug. She realized that her viral video, her smear campaign, and her grand banquet had all been carefully orchestrated steps leading directly into my trap. She had invited an audience to witness her own execution. I looked down at her feeling absolutely zero sympathy. I turned to Julian and nodded. The corporate lawyer closed his briefcase and stepped aside, allowing the uniformed county bailiff to walk directly up to my sobbing mother and my paralyzed father. The final piece of the puzzle was ready to be delivered. The truth was fully exposed, and the ultimate penalty was about to be served today. The uniformed county bailiff stepped forward, his heavy boots thudding against the polished hardwood floor and breaking the spell of silent shock that held the room captive. He reached into his leather satchel and withdrew 3 thick, crisp manila envelopes, sealed with the official red crest of the county court. He moved with the cold, mechanical efficiency of the legal system, entirely indifferent to the luxury of his surroundings or the fabricated prestige of the people he was approaching. He stopped directly in front of my father, who was still leaning heavily against the dining table, gasping for air. By the power vested in me by the county court, the bailiff announced, his voice a booming baritone that commanded absolute attention. "You are hereby served." He slapped the first heavy envelope directly onto the table, right over the fake will my parents had just proudly signed. He then turned to my mother, who was still sobbing on the Persian rug, and dropped the second envelope right beside her trembling hands. Finally, he marched over to Mason, who was trying to shrink away, and shoved the third envelope forcefully against his chest. Mason fumbled with the paperwork, his hands shaking so violently that the envelope slipped through his fingers and clattered to the floor. I walked slowly around the dining table, making sure every single guest in the room had a perfectly clear view of the legal documents now resting in my family's possession. "I want to make this exceptionally clear," I stated, my voice cutting through my mother's hysterical weeping. "That pathetic piece of paper you all just witnessed them sign is legally void. It is a fraudulent document. You cannot bequeath a house you do not own. You cannot pass down a legacy built entirely on someone else's dime. You are not homeowners passing property to your golden child. You are simply delinquent tenants, and your lease has officially been terminated." My father stared at the bold black lettering on the front of the envelope. His eyes widened as the reality of the document finally registered in his brain. "It is a 30-day notice of eviction," I explained, projecting my voice to the farthest corners of the grand living room. "You have exactly 1 month to pack up your belongings and vacate my property. If you remain inside this house past the 30th day, law enforcement officers will arrive to physically remove you and everything you own from the premises." The public humiliation was absolute and inescapable. The elite country club friends who had just been praising my parents' resilience were now staring at them with unfiltered disgust. These were people who valued wealth and status above all else, and my parents had just been exposed as broke, fraudulent imposters. The hushed whispers among the crowd grew louder, turning into sharp, stinging judgments. I watched a prominent local judge, who had been invited as a guest of honor, shake his head in sheer disbelief and turn his back on my father. The social execution was complete. They were being ostracized in real time right in the middle of their own extravagant banquet. Barbara let out a piercing, agonizing shriek. She scrambled up from the floor, clutching the envelope with frantic, desperate hands. "You cannot do this to us, Vivian!" She wailed, her face a twisted mask of sheer panic and fury. "This is our home. We raised you here. Where are we supposed to go? We have absolutely no money. You are throwing your own elderly parents out onto the freezing streets. You are a heartless, vicious monster." I looked at her without a single ounce of pity. "You made your bed, Mom," I replied, my tone freezing the remaining air in the room. "When you chose to steal my identity to fund Mason's criminal lifestyle, you sealed your own fate. When you chose to call my investors and attempt to destroy my company, you eliminated any lingering sympathy I might have had for you. You thought you could publicly shame me into submission by leveraging your elite friends and a viral video. But you forgot one crucial detail. I am the one who holds all the cards. I am the landlord, and you are just a terrible tenant." Richard finally found his voice, though it was weak and trembling. He looked around the room, his eyes pleading with his wealthy friends for any sign of support or intervention. "Please," he begged. Stretching a shaking hand toward a wealthy real estate developer he played golf with every Sunday. This is just a massive misunderstanding. My daughter is confused. She is trying to steal our home. The developer stepped back physically, recoiling from my father's outstretched hand. Do not drag me into your criminal fraud, Richard, the man said, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. We all saw the property deed on the screen. We all heard what you did. You are an absolute disgrace to this entire community. The developer turned to his wife, signaling that it was time to leave. Several other high society guests immediately followed suit, setting down their crystal champagne flutes and heading straight for the front door. They wanted nothing to do with the sinking ship that was my family's reputation. The mass exodus triggered a new wave of panic in Mason. He watched the wealthy connections he relied on for his Ponzi scheme marching out the door. The investors he had been courting, the people he needed to scam just to stay afloat, were abandoning him. Wait! Mason shouted, sprinting toward the entryway and desperately trying to block their path. Please do not leave. The business is still solid. I can still guarantee your returns. I just need a little more time to finalize the paperwork. Nobody stopped to listen to his pathetic begging. They pushed past him, eager to escape the humiliating spectacle. Maya stood paralyzed near the fireplace, watching the chaotic destruction of the life she thought she had secured. The remaining guests watched as my father finally gave out. The sheer weight of his public humiliation crushed whatever strength he had left. Richard clutched his chest with both hands, letting out a strained, ragged breath. His knees buckled beneath him, and he collapsed heavily into a velvet dining chair. He stared blankly ahead, his eyes glassy and vacant. The pride he had cultivated for decades, the carefully constructed image of a successful patriarch, vanished into the ether. He was nothing but a broken man, sitting in a house he did not own, facing the consequences of his own arrogance. Seeing his father crumble and realizing his elite connections were completely gone, Mason snapped. The reality of his impending federal indictment and absolute poverty destroyed the last shred of his sanity. His face turned a deep mottled purple. He let out a feral, guttural roar that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. You ruined everything, you ungrateful witch, Mason screamed. He planted his hands on the mahogany dining table and vaulted across the expensive floral arrangements. Crystal glasses shattered and silverware flew across the room as he lunged directly at me, his fists clenched tight, aiming right for my face. I did not even flinch. I did not take a single step backward. Before Mason could even clear the width of the table, my private security detail reacted with devastating precision. The guard on my left stepped forward, catching Mason in midair. He grabbed my brother by the lapels of his expensive tailored suit and yanked him downward. The second guard swept Mason's legs out from under him. They slammed him face first into the hardwood floor with a sickening thud. Mason thrashed wildly, kicking his legs and spitting venomous curses, but the guards pinned his arm sharply behind his back, rendering him completely immobilized. Maya let out a blood-curdling scream. She pressed her hands against the sides of her face, her eyes wide with absolute horror. She watched her husband writhing on the floor like a trapped animal. The polished, sophisticated facade she had projected all evening completely evaporated. She took several frantic steps backward, bumping into the fireplace mantel. The reality of her situation hit her with full force. She was legally married to a broke, violent criminal who was currently pinned to the floor by private security while a county bailiff watched. She was going to lose her designer clothes, her luxury vacations, and her pristine social media aesthetic. Her entire world was effectively over. The extended family members who had stayed behind were now paralyzed by the violent escalation. Aunts and uncles who had spent the last 3 days sending me hateful text messages based on Maya's fake viral video now stared at my parents with unvarnished disgust. The truth was finally undeniable. They looked at the glowing television screen displaying my property deed, then down at the eviction notices resting on the table. The whispers began immediately. Hushed, harsh voices swept through the remaining crowd. They realized Barbara and Richard were the true fraudsters. They realized the golden child was a violent thief. Barbara scrambled to her feet, reaching out to her sister, my Aunt Carol, for support. Carol, please, you have to understand. Barbara pleaded, her voice cracking. We were just trying to protect the family. Aunt Carol took a deliberate step backward, pulling her arm out of my mother's reach. Do not touch me, Barbara. Carol said, her voice dripping with pure revulsion. You stole your own daughter's identity. You lied to all of us. You made us attack Vivian while you were living in her house for free. You are a disgusting sociopath. Carol turned her back on my mother and walked straight toward the front door. The other relatives quickly followed her lead. One by one, they turned their backs on Barbara. Cousins who had praised her resilience just 20 minutes ago now avoided making eye contact. Uncles who had patted Richard on the back now muttered insults as they hurried out of the dining room. They treated my parents like toxic waste. Within 5 minutes, the grand dining room was completely empty of guests. The caterers had quietly slipped out the back door, leaving trays of expensive gourmet food sitting untouched. The string quartet had packed their instruments and fled. The only people left in the sprawling estate were my defeated family, my legal team, my security guards, and the bailiff. Mason stopped fighting against the guards. He lay on the floor, panting heavily, his face pressed against the cold wood. Richard remained slumped in the dining chair, staring into the void. Maya stood frozen by the fireplace, crying silently as her makeup ran down her cheeks. Barbara stood completely alone in the center of the ruined banquet. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of my mother's ragged breathing. I walked slowly around the shattered crystal and crushed flowers scattered across the floor. I looked down at my brother, who was defeated and humiliated. You thought you could use violence to solve your problems, Mason, I said, my voice perfectly steady. You thought you could intimidate me into silence. But you have zero power here. You are just a pathetic fraud who is about to face serious federal prison time. I turned my attention to Maya, who flinched when my eyes met hers. You wanted viral fame? Maya, I asked coldly. You wanted to be the tragic victim on social media. Well, congratulations. The internet is about to find out that you are married to a scammer and living in a house you do not own. Your influencer career is officially dead. I finally looked at my parents. Richard was unresponsive, a ghost of his former self. Barbara was shaking violently, completely stripped of her arrogance. You have 30 days, I reminded them, my tone devoid of any empathy. If you leave trash on this property when you vacate, I will sue for cleanup. I turned on my heel and walked out the front door, leaving them trapped in the absolute ruins of their making. My security team and Julian followed closely behind me as we descended the steps and climbed into my waiting car. I did not look back even once. The drive back to my pristine penthouse was incredibly quiet and wonderfully peaceful. The long, exhausting war was finally over, and the spectacular legal fallout was officially about to begin. Fast forward exactly 1 entire month. The 30-day eviction notice expired on a rainy Tuesday morning. I certainly did not attend the move-out process personally. I had my property management team and private security oversee the entire operation to ensure they did not damage the estate. My manager sent me photographs of Barbara and Richard hauling cheap cardboard boxes into the back of a rented moving truck. The luxurious imported furniture they had bragged about for years had to be sold off at a fraction of its value just to cover their moving expenses. They had zero savings and absolutely zero credit. With their bank accounts frozen and their reputation completely destroyed, my parents were forced to move into a tiny, low-income apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. The transition was brutal for them. Barbara, who had spent decades cultivating her image as a high-society matriarch, was suddenly stripped of everything that gave her identity. She attempted to show up at her exclusive country club the following week, pretending that they were simply downsizing by choice. The club management stopped her at the front gate. They informed her that her membership had been permanently revoked due to unpaid dues and morality clause violations. Her wealthy friends, the same people who had eagerly eaten her catered food at the banquet, completely ghosted her. They blocked her phone number and instructed their security not to let her onto their properties. The extended family members who had previously taken her side were even more ruthless. Aunt Carol led the charge in entirely ostracizing my parents from the family tree. Barbara and Richard were completely isolated, living in a cramped two-bedroom apartment that smelled of stale cigarettes and damp carpeting. For Mason, the consequences were infinitely more severe than just losing a house. The day after the banquet, Julian fulfilled his promise and handed over the massive binders of financial forensics to the federal authorities. The investigation was swift and absolutely devastating. Federal agents raided Mason's rented office space, confiscating his computers and business records. The illusion of his visionary tech startup evaporated overnight. The authorities formally charged him with multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and operating a Ponzi scheme. Because he had specifically targeted my accounts and defrauded investors across state lines, the charges carried mandatory minimum federal prison sentences. He tried to reach out to me once, begging me to pay for a criminal defense attorney. I simply forwarded his voicemail to Julian and let the legal system swallow him whole. Mason was currently sitting in a county holding cell, unable to post his exorbitant bail, facing a decade behind bars. Maya experienced her own spectacular downfall. She had married Mason strictly for his perceived wealth and the elite social status it provided. When she realized her husband was entirely broke and drowning in illegal debt, her loyalty vanished instantly. The very next morning after the banquet, she hired a ruthless divorce attorney. She officially filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and extreme financial fraud. She packed up all her designer bags and moved in with her sister, desperately trying to distance herself from the radioactive crater that was the Mason family name. But Maya was not satisfied with just walking away. She actively attempted to sue Mason for emotional distress and financial damages, claiming he had completely deceived her about his net worth before their marriage. It was a hilarious and pathetic legal maneuver because there was absolutely no money left for her to take. Mason's accounts were frozen by the federal government, and his assets were seized to pay back the defrauded investors. Maya spent thousands of dollars on legal fees, only to realize she was trying to squeeze blood from a stone. Her social media empire collapsed simultaneously. The internet is highly unforgiving, and the truth about the banquet had leaked almost immediately. Several guests had recorded my confrontation and posted the videos online. The footage of me projecting the authentic property deed and exposing my parents' identity theft went completely viral. The narrative flipped violently against Maya. The digital mob that she had weaponized against me quickly turned their pitchforks toward her. Millions of users flooded her comment sections, mocking her fake tears and calling her a scammer by association. Brands immediately dropped her sponsorships, canceling her lucrative endorsement deals overnight. She tried to post a tearful apology video, claiming she was also a victim of Mason's manipulation, but nobody believed her. Her follower count plummeted, and she was forced to permanently delete all her social media accounts to escape the relentless public humiliation. Every single person who had conspired against me was now paying a massive, irreversible price. They had let their greed and arrogance blind them to the obvious reality that I was no longer their victim. I had given them every opportunity to just leave me alone. If they had simply accepted my silence and moved on, they could have lived in my house for the rest of their lives completely rent-free. But their insatiable need to control me, to humiliate me, and to steal from me became their ultimate undoing. They dug their own graves with their lies, and I simply provided the shovels. I sat in my downtown office reviewing the final property inspection report for the estate. The large house was totally and completely empty. The locks had been changed, and a fresh coat of paint was already being applied to the walls. The heavy brass locks had been changed immediately, and a fresh bright coat of paint was already being expertly applied to the interior walls. I listed the sprawling, highly sought-after suburban estate on the competitive real estate market that very same afternoon. It successfully sold well above the initial asking price in just under 48 hours to a wonderful young couple who had absolutely no connection to my toxic family history. I took the massive profit from the quick sale and seamlessly rolled it directly back into my growing corporate expansion fund. But the universe was certainly not finished delivering its absolute poetic justice. Just days after the successful sale, the footage from the grand banquet finally hit the internet. One of the stunned high society guests had quietly recorded the entire explosive confrontation on their smartphone and leaked it completely anonymously to a major gossip blog. The video spread with unstoppable velocity across every social platform. It showed everything in crystal clear definition. It captured me projecting the authentic property deed onto the television screen. It captured the county bailiff handing my weeping mother the formal eviction notice. And most devastatingly, it captured Mason lunging across the dining table like a rabid animal before being brutally pinned to the hardwood floor by my private security guards. The internet exploded into a massive, unstoppable frenzy. The same digital mob that Maya had weaponized against me turned around and devoured her. Millions watched her husband get exposed as a violent broke fraud in real time. Legal commentators broke down every second of the footage, completely vindicating my actions. Maya was transformed from a tragic pregnant victim into a global laughingstock overnight. Her curated influencer aesthetic was permanently replaced by freeze frames of her horrified face at the banquet. She instantly became a national punchline. While Maya was hiding from the paparazzi and aggressively deleting hateful comments, my professional life reached its ultimate pinnacle. The public vindication erased any lingering doubts among my corporate investors. With my pristine reputation fully restored and our quarterly metrics breaking every historical record we pushed forward with the initial public offering. On a bright Tuesday morning, I stood on the trading floor with Julian and my core executive team. We watched the massive digital ticker display my company logo. When the market officially opened, the stock price surged with breathtaking momentum. The numbers climbed higher, shattering all of our most optimistic financial projections. By the time the closing bell rang that afternoon, the market valuation had officially solidified. I was no longer just a successful tech founder. I was a self-made multimillionaire with a publicly traded empire. My team erupted into cheers, popping expensive champagne right there on the trading floor. We fought through grueling corporate battles and vicious personal sabotage to reach this exact moment. That evening, I hosted an exclusive celebration at my downtown penthouse. The expansive living space was filled with the vibrant energy of the people who stood by my side when the world tried to crush me. Julian was chatting with my lead developers, while my assistant coordinated the gourmet catering. I stepped away from the loud music, sliding open the heavy glass doors to step out onto my massive private balcony. The cool night air rushed over my face. I stood at the glass railing, looking out over the glittering city skyline. The towering skyscrapers stretched out before me, glowing with limitless potential. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the immense magnitude of my true freedom wash over me completely. I thought about the terrified 25-year-old girl lying in a hospital bed, crying over ruined credit scores and stolen medical funds. I thought about the decade I spent silently transferring my hard-earned money into my parents' accounts, hoping to buy their unconditional love. I realize now their love was never for sale because they simply had none to give. As I stared out at the beautiful city, my phone buzzed sharply in my blazer pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the bright screen. It was a text message from an unsaved number, but the frantic tone was unmistakably familiar. It was from Barbara. Vivian. Please, the message read. We are struggling so much. Your father is sick and we cannot afford rent next month. I am so sorry for everything we said and did to you. Please forgive us. We are your parents. We need you. I stared at the glowing words, reading the pathetic, groveling apology. A few years ago, a message like this would have instantly triggered my guilt. I would have panicked and frantically wired thousands of dollars to fix their self-inflicted disasters. But tonight, standing on the balcony of my penthouse as a triumphant self-made woman, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger, there was no sadness, there was just a profound, enduring emptiness where my sense of familial obligation used to be. They were only sorry they had lost their free ride. I did not type a reply. I did not offer a single word of closure or forgiveness. I simply smiled a genuine, peaceful smile. I looked at the sleek, expensive smartphone in my hand, and then looked at the metal trash cans situated near the edge of the balcony. Without a second thought, I tossed the phone directly into the garbage. It hit the bottom with a satisfying hollow clatter, silencing their toxic demands forever. I turned my back on the glittering city skyline and walked back inside my brightly lit penthouse. The warm sound of laughter and celebration washed over me immediately. My team raised their glasses as I re-entered the room, their faces beaming with genuine pride and shared victory. These were the people who actually valued me. This was the family I chose to build. I grabbed a fresh glass of champagne and joined them, ready to embrace the magnificent, limitless future I fought so hard to conquer. The story of Vivian teaches a profound lesson about self-worth and the true definition of family. For years, she equated familial loyalty with endless financial sacrifice, hoping to earn unconditional love. Instead, she learned that blood relations never excuse toxic manipulation. By severing the ties that bound her to their abuse, Vivian reclaimed her identity, proving that true family values you for who you are, not what you provide. Never be afraid to walk away from a toxic environment to protect your peace. Have you ever had to set hard boundaries with relatives? Share your story in the comments below.